The billionaire laughed so loudly that workers across the dusty neighborhood stopped what they were doing. He stood in front of the tiny weathered house, looked at its faded paint, cracked porch, and hand-built garden, then smirked as though he had discovered the greatest joke of his life. Everyone expected the humble homeowner to lower his head in shame. No one expected nearly 50 identical black luxury cars to roll slowly down the narrow street less than an hour later, stopping one after another until the entire neighborhood fell into stunned silence. The man who had been mocked didn't smile with pride or revenge. Instead, tears filled his eyes as he realized the family he believed had forgotten him had finally found their way back home. If you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change lives, please take a moment to like this video, leave a thoughtful comment, share this story with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel so our community can continue sharing heartfelt stories together. Rowan Mercer had spent most of his life believing that a person's character mattered far more than the size of a house or the balance of a bank account. His tiny home sat at the edge of a quiet American town where the sidewalks were uneven, children still rode bicycles after school, and neighbors waved from their porches every morning. The house was barely 600 square feet, built almost entirely by Rowan's own hands after years of hard work. Every board carried a memory. Every nail represented another weekend sacrificed. The vegetable garden beside the porch fed not only Rowan but also several elderly neighbors who struggled to buy groceries. His little workshop behind the house repaired broken furniture free of charge for anyone who couldn't afford replacements. Rowan had never become wealthy, but he had quietly become the kind of man people trusted. Few people knew that Rowan had once belonged to one of the richest families in the country. His grandfather had built an industrial empire that stretched across construction, renewable energy, shipping, and technology. Newspapers once called the Mercer family untouchable. Yet Rowan had walked away from it all in his early 20s after refusing to participate in a bitter inheritance battle that destroyed relationships throughout the family. While everyone fought over power and money, Rowan simply left with a backpack, a few $100s, and the determination to build an honest life without relying on the Mercer fortune. Years passed. His relatives assumed he wanted nothing to do with them. Rowan assumed they felt the same. Across the country, billionaire investor Preston Caldwell had built his reputation on appearances. Every interview featured another expensive suit, another private jet, another speech about success. He believed wealth proved intelligence and poverty revealed failure. His companies purchased neighborhoods, luxury resorts, and commercial developments without much concern for the people already living there. When his newest project targeted Rowan's quiet neighborhood, Preston arrived personally to inspect the land. As photographers followed him from one property to another, Preston spotted Rowan painting the railing of his tiny porch. He walked over with cameras capturing every step. Looking around with obvious amusement, he shook his head before making a cruel remark about how some people never aimed higher than surviving in little boxes while successful people built real legacies. Several reporters laughed politely. A few construction executives smiled nervously. Rowan simply stood, placed his paintbrush down carefully, and looked at the billionaire with calm eyes. He felt no anger because life had already taught him something Preston had not yet learned. Money could build walls, but only humility built homes. Neighbors watched, expecting Rowan to argue. Instead, he quietly returned to painting his porch while Preston dismissed the property as insignificant before continuing his inspection. The cameras followed the billionaire away, believing they had captured another example of confidence. What they truly captured was pride moments before it met humility. Later that morning, Rowan continued watering his tomatoes when an unfamiliar black sedan slowly entered the street. Then another appeared behind it. Then another. Soon the entire neighborhood watched in disbelief as an endless procession of identical black luxury vehicles rolled toward the tiny house. Drivers exited simultaneously, opening doors with practiced precision. Men and women dressed in elegant business attire stood respectfully beside the cars. The silence became almost overwhelming. Finally, an elderly gentleman stepped forward carrying a leather folder. His hands trembled not from age alone but from emotion. He had searched for Rowan for nearly 18 years, the man introduced himself as Graham Ellison, the longtime family attorney who had served Rowan's grandfather until his passing. After decades of searching through old records, private investigators, and community organizations, they had finally found the grandson everyone believed had disappeared forever. Rowan's grandfather had left detailed instructions that if Rowan were ever located, every available family representative should accompany the attorney personally. That explained the extraordinary motorcade. Executives, family trustees, longtime employees, and directors had all insisted on coming. The neighbors stared in amazement while Rowan remained almost frozen. He had spent nearly 2 decades believing that chapter of his life had closed forever. Graham handed Rowan several carefully preserved letters written by his grandfather shortly before his death. The elderly businessman admitted in those letters that greed had blinded much of the family. He confessed that Rowan had been the only person willing to sacrifice wealth rather than sacrifice integrity. The grandfather wrote that losing Rowan became the greatest regret of his entire life. He had spent his final years trying unsuccessfully to reconnect with the grandson who reminded him what true success actually looked like. Rowan read every word with tears slowly falling onto the faded paper. Around them, the neighborhood grew quieter than anyone could remember. News spread rapidly because the same reporters who had followed Preston earlier learned about the extraordinary gathering. Television crews returned expecting another dramatic business story. Instead, they found something entirely different. They found executives embracing a man who lived in a tiny house. They found neighbors crying beside him. They found billion-dollar company directors treating Rowan with remarkable respect. Preston also returned, assuming another investor had arrived to compete for the development project. What he witnessed instead left him speechless. The family attorney announced publicly that Rowan Mercer had become the sole controlling heir of the Mercer Foundation and the majority shareholder of a global business empire after every legal condition outlined in the grandfather's estate had finally been fulfilled through Rowan's discovery. The companies were now worth billions beyond imagination. Cameras immediately turned toward Preston. Only hours earlier he had mocked the very man now standing at the center of one of the largest inheritances in modern business history. But Rowan surprised everyone once again that he did not celebrate. He did not boast. He did not remind Preston of the insults. Instead, Rowan asked whether everyone would mind sitting in the shade beneath the old maple tree because several elderly neighbors became tired standing in the afternoon sun. The executives happily agreed. They sat on folding chairs borrowed from nearby homes while children offered bottles of water from coolers. Billionaire executives who normally negotiated inside glass skyscrapers now shared lemonade on a quiet residential street. The contrast became unforgettable. As discussions continued, Rowan learned another heartbreaking truth. Many longtime Mercer employees feared losing their jobs because aggressive investors wanted to divide the company into smaller pieces. Thousands of families depended on those businesses. His grandfather had hoped Rowan would someday protect both the workers and the company's original values of fairness and community investment. Rowan looked around his modest neighborhood. He saw retired teachers, mechanics, nurses, veterans, single parents, and children playing together. Then he realized something. Everything he had learned about leadership came not from billion-dollar boardrooms but from ordinary people helping one another every single day. When Rowan finally accepted responsibility for the Mercer legacy, he announced his first decisions immediately. The neighborhood development would be cancelled, every family facing displacement would remain safely in their homes. A new community improvement program would renovate aging houses instead of demolishing them. Scholarships would support local students regardless of financial background. Employee profit sharing would return across Mercer companies. Executives would spend time volunteering within communities before assuming senior leadership positions. Many people cried openly because they recognized genuine compassion instead of carefully rehearsed public relations. Preston watched everything unfold with growing discomfort. For years he believed respect could be purchased through success. Now he watched thousands admire a man whose greatest achievement had never been wealth. It had been kindness. Several days later, Preston quietly requested a private meeting with Rowan. Instead of inviting him into a luxurious office, Rowan welcomed him into the same tiny house that had once been mocked. They sat at the small kitchen table Rowan had built himself years earlier. Fresh bread baked that morning filled the room with warmth. Preston admitted something he had never confessed publicly. Despite possessing unimaginable wealth, he had become isolated from nearly everyone who genuinely cared about him. His children rarely visited. Former friends only called when they wanted investments. Employees feared him more than they respected him. Success had surrounded him with admiration but left him desperately lonely. For the first time in many years, Preston apologized without making excuses. Rowan accepted the apology because forgiveness had shaped every important decision throughout his own life. Holding bitterness would never rebuild another person's heart. Instead of humiliating Preston, Rowan invited him to participate in rebuilding the neighborhood he once intended to replace. To nearly everyone's surprise, Preston accepted. Month after month, residents witnessed remarkable changes. The billionaire who once judged homes by their market value now painted fences beside retired veterans. He planted community gardens with local children. He funded libraries without insisting his name appear on the buildings. He quietly paid medical bills for struggling families. After learning how many people had helped Rowan throughout the years, his transformation wasn't perfect or immediate, but it became sincere. People slowly stopped seeing him as the arrogant billionaire from the headlines. They began seeing him as another neighbor trying to become a better man. Years later, visitors traveled from across the country to study the remarkable Mercer Community Initiative. Business schools examined how compassion had strengthened company performance. Economists noted that employee loyalty reached record levels. Families once living paycheck to paycheck found opportunities through scholarships, apprenticeships, and small business grants. Yet journalists always asked Rowan the same question: why did he continue living in the tiny house when he could own anything? Rowan would simply smile. Because this little home reminded him every morning that gratitude grows far faster than pride. It reminded him that happiness never depended on square footage. It reminded him that every blessing became meaningful only when shared with others. Most importantly, it reminded him of the afternoon when 50 black cars arrived, not to rescue a forgotten poor man, but to reveal that true greatness had quietly been living inside the smallest house on the street all along. Before this story comes to an end, we'd love to hear from you. Please leave a meaningful comment sharing whether you believe forgiveness is stronger than revenge, or tell us about a moment when kindness changed someone's life forever. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Remember that people may judge your home, your job, your appearance, or your circumstances, but they can never measure the quiet strength of a compassionate heart. Real wealth is not counted by what waits inside a bank account but by the number of lives made brighter because you chose kindness when the world expected bitterness. And sometimes, the greatest person in the neighborhood is the one living in the smallest house, patiently building a legacy that no amount of money could ever buy.